you okay for us to? Thank you. If you can take your seats, we'll make a start. Thank you. Please be advised this meeting will be recorded and posted on the Council's YouTube channel. Can all those speaking ensure you switch on your microphone before addressing the meeting, and remember to switch it off when you finish speaking. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Ivis Williams and Councillor Dominic Mbang, and Councillor Izzy Cook has given apologies for lateness. She'll be with us shortly. Item 2, urgent business. I'll just draw everyone's attention to the fact that an addendum has been published for item 6. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any personal or financial interest to declare on? Yes, Councillor Fletcher?
I'm a council tenant, Chair.
Thank you. Any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can members confirm as accurate the record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of November? Agreed. Thank you. Right, let's move on to the housing revenue account. So we're going to be considering the housing revenue account budget proposals, and we can submit any comments to the Cabinet. Tonight, this will be presented by Councillor Pat Slattery, and we also have Jamie Carswell and Damon Cook, and Leader of the Council.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, committee and colleagues and others behind me. My name is Councillor Pat Slattery, Cabinet Member for Housing, Neighbourhoods and Homelessness. I've got a very short introduction to the item. Just to say, because although I think members know, others may not, the housing revenue account relates entirely to the expenditure on council-owned homes and gets all of its income from rents and service charges and is ring-fenced. So it's not in any way subsidised by the council tax, and equally it doesn't subsidise the council tax. So it's a ring-fenced account. It's come under quite a lot of pressure over the last 3 years or more for lots of different reasons, one of which, post-Grenfell, rightly, landlords like us and others are being required to spend a significant amount of money on improving building safety, and we've done that. We've historically had low rents, and that obviously impacts on the budget. And latterly, we've now got a big capital programme, and we've been funding Greenwich builds and other housing acquisitions. So we pay the interest rate and the principal from the HRA. So it's under a bit of pressure. The report includes the measures we're taking to get it back into a healthy balance. The details summarised at paragraph 1.7, and I'm sure you'll have some questions. We're happy to answer them. Just to draw attention to one of these measures, that's a rent rise for all of our tenants effective from April 25, and that's 2.7%. That's based on the Consumer Price Index in September, which at that time was 1.7 plus 1%, and that's a government formula, and we cannot breach it. That's a cap. Equally, service charges are going up 2.7%. That said, we do remain the cheapest, or the second cheapest rents in London. So that's my introduction. I'm sitting here with the director, and between us, we'll answer your questions, probably mainly him, to be honest. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Slattery. I'm going to take the questions in sections. So to start with, does any members of the committee have any questions on either the current financial position or the risk of the HRA? So I'm looking here at sections 4.1 to 4.4. I'll give you all a minute to check before we move on to the PIDs and the other proposals. So this is current financial position or risks. Councillor Hartley.
Chair, I've got a question on the rent rise. Is this the appropriate moment, as it was mentioned? Thank you. Thank you for introducing the report. The rent rise obviously is a lot lower than previous years because of inflation coming down so successfully. And the 2.7%, as you said, it's a cap. It's the maximum allowed by government. It takes average rents to £113 per week nearly, and obviously cost of living pressures are still high, so appreciate the challenges, financial challenges on the HRA, but I think it's important that we ask the question that tenants will want to know that alternatives were considered. So could you tell us, did you consider alternatives to that full maximum allowed rent rise sort of as part of the process?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Hartley. We did indeed model out changes to the lower rent rise, and from memory, about 1% reduction in the rent rise is about £1.4 million less revenue per year. I'll just check that exact figure, but that's memory. The critical table that drove the decision making here when Councillor Slattery reviewed it was the table in 4.1.1, and in the hard copy they come out in shades of grey, but I'm hoping you've got the colour copy and you will see that in the years 25, 26 and 26, 27 we are below the minimum working balances that are required to be financially prudently safe. This is the lowest level of balances that the HRA has ever in this borough faced, and if they drop below zero, we are illegal. We cannot continue to trade the HRA, and we would have to then have emergency shutdown measures of a whole range of HRA expenditure. On that basis, the balanced package of the rent rise, the garage rise, the additional savings, the existing savings, but also some areas of key investment, felt as we were sailing as close to the wind as we possibly could. And obviously, the vital thing for residents is that we're able to continue to deliver our services in a way that they would expect without having to go to emergency repairs or some such, which would have a strongly detrimental effect on residents' quality of life. The mitigating factor is the hardship fund, and I'm happy to talk about that later. I'm imagining you might have a question about that later.
Councillor Fletcher?
I have a question on leaseholder charges. Is that for, yeah? Okay, so I can't remember what, I did read it. I can't remember what number it was now. I was just trying to look through the thing to find it. So do we know what the leaseholder increase costs will be? And I was reading the report and it was talking about there may be some exemptions for the fire security work and fire doors we're doing.
It's 2.7% on service charges as well, yeah, which is for tenants and, where appropriate, leaseholders. On the fire exemptions, I'm going to hand over to Jamie.
Yes, it's a complicated one, this. So, as Councillor Slattery said, we go for full cost recovery. So we're transparent to our leaseholders and show when we issue our service charges, we actually, in our estimates that we produce in April, they are an accurate estimate of what we expect to spend that year. If we spend less on things like communal repairs or something like that, then when the actuals come out 18 months later, after the accounts are done, then there's an adjustment. And that's, so if we do less, need to do less of those, say, communal repairs, that will be a decrease, and or if we have spent less on communal energy, that will be a decrease, and vice versa. In terms of fire doors, historically, there has been, at moments in the past, we have offered fire doors free to residents, free to leaseholders, because we felt the overall safety of the block has felt appropriate to secure the safety of the entire block. Each fire door that's fully fitted and sealed is, from memory, about £1,000. I'm not sure that is something the HRA can currently finance. And that is a dilemma, and we'll be looking at leaseholder leases to look at how we'll be in a position to recharge those to leaseholders.
Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the introductory comments. I wonder if you could offer some views as to the capital programme extending some works past 2028 and 9, and what the impact of that likely to be on residents who may be waiting for improvements in their housing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fahy. You're right to observe that, and you'll see that for every £20 million of borrowing for the HRA, there's a £1 million revenue saving. So that's a particular alleviation to our pressures in the short term. What we have tried to do is balance our borrowing and spread it out a bit, allowing us to winter the storm of the low years you will see 25, 26, 26, 27 and 27, 28, and effectively recover that and make that, if you like, postpone that borrowing for 2 years, but then catch up in those 2 years afterwards. When we are prioritising our capital programme, we obviously go for and prioritise health and safety works first. So works that are involved in securing resident safety has to be the top priority. Sometimes those are works that are identified in fire risk assessments. Sometimes those are works to do with electrical rewiring, where our electrical systems are needing replacement, communal electrical systems. And we obviously prioritise for that our high-rise blocks first, because generally that's the risk-based approach that we have. So some works, such as kitchens and bathrooms, lift upgrades and external decorations work, are not related to immediately to resident health and safety, and so they would be in the category of the ones that we would look to rephase over those 2 years. I have to say, obviously, if the financial position improves in the next year, and there is some possibility that in the settlement that's coming forward from the government, there may be some opportunities for improvement. They're detailed under 4.8.4, and those are issues that we're obviously lobbying for through members quite hard, because if, for example, some degree of rent convergence or some degree of more funding for fire safety remediation, building safety remediation, or retreatment of and consistent treatment of HRA debt was introduced, then that would allow us to have a more financially secure position on the HRA when we next update the MTFS, and then we could bring forward some of our capital works. So I think for transparency purposes, it's been important to flag that up now and record so members can understand the difficult situations we're in. But this is an MTFS that we update every 6 months, and if the position were to improve, obviously we would be going back to members to ask for them to, if you like, reprioritise any investment and restate investment and bring forward investment that that members would want to do.
Thank you. We've strayed into the later section of the report now, so I'm happy to take any questions from the rest of the report. One question from me, please. On the changes from building to buying council homes, it says that there'll be 90 fewer homes built in this part of the programme, but that will be offset by 650 to 700 new homes. Now, just for clarity, by building 90 fewer, how many more will we buy? Because of the 650 to 700 is probably including ones we were planning to buy anyway. So what is the actual difference there that we're making?
So my colleagues from Place and Growth behind me have the numbers absolutely at their fingertips, and I know their intention is to actually bring a detailed report to Cabinet to detail this these plans in the near future. The net change is just in excess of 400 homes. So 90 less and further acquisitions, and it details the 650 to 700 here. There are some complicating factors of other types of acquisitions that we're doing around temporary accommodation. So, and this report is obviously just about the HRA, so some of those aren't in that total of the net increase of 400, but the report that comes, I think is planned in the spring, will set out that full positives and negatives. And I think my colleagues in Place and Growth have been very successful in being opportunistic and focused around the opportunities in the market. And this isn't something that comes around every year, but we have had an opportunity to secure some acquisitions in principle, and when they come to pass, in actual fact, that will choose to be a much more cost-effective way at higher grant levels than they would have been if we were just building out on quite small sites. And the Greenwich Builds programme has had great success in building some on small sites and large bedroom homes on small sites, but probably it has been expensive. So this is a slight rebalancing to allow it to go further.
Thank you. And just a follow-up on this particular proposal. Before I became a councillor, I wasn't aware of some of the difficulties of right to buy. And one of the things that has struck me is that when you have leaseholders in a council block, obviously we have a lot of problems with repair costs, for example, that gets passed on to leaseholders. And so I'm conscious that if we're buying homes from private providers, are we storing up problems for the future whereby a private block needs significant works doing, and that's going to cause us financial detriment in the future, and has that been taken into account?
Financial model.
Jamie will jump in when I say this wrong, but the ones we've acquired, for example, one of the blocks on the Greenwich Millennium Village, they're wholly us, so they're not mixed tenure. But obviously you speak to a very important point that is causing issues and difficulties. But the ones we've acquired by and large are just us occupying them.
So that would mean, for example, that the service charges can be wholly set by us. So we're not going to be charging our tenants a service charge and then having a higher service charge charged to us by the private freeholder. Thank you. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question was following on from similar subjects and from Councillor Fletcher's question about recharging to leaseholders of repair costs, and obviously a very live issue at the moment with everything going on with roof replacement on the Middle Park estate. Jamie, you said that it's a full cost recovery approach, which has always been the case. Obviously, that exposes leaseholders to directly to the council's procurement decisions. So could I just ask the cabinet member, given what's currently happening on the Middle Park estate and the reaction that has caused, could I ask her what she's learned in terms of transparency? Because leaseholders really want transparency on the costs to the council before they are then fully recharged. So what has she learned about the process of being transparent?
Well, I did my humility at full council and the learning. That was in relation to capital service charges. Obviously, no, sorry, it's fine, I was getting confused. Things I've learned is that we do need to be entirely transparent. And for an example, we have been slow to give individuals a copy of their surveys, which I need to get under, but I would have thought that was absolutely the very least piece of evidence. And we'll be chivying that along, and there's a meeting on Monday which will share quite a lot more information than I was able to share at the public meeting last Wednesday and last night, because it's just too detailed for full council, to be honest. So I think I'll leave it there. I think we could be more transparent about, we need to show more of our homework, is the way I've been putting it. so that people understand how our processes and how we've gone about constructing things. I feel able to defend the processes, but I think people need to be able to see them much more clearly.
Agreed. Thank you for that answer. I've got some questions on the hardship fund.
Yeah, just a quick point on that. Where we're doing roofs, in discussions I've had with leaseholders, is they're finding it difficult to get access to the guarantees that are given to the council from the roofer to say it's going to last for 10 years. Sometimes it does, sometimes it don't. So is that something we could look into? If that makes sense.
Yes, so of course, but the guarantee would be to us as the freeholder, not to the leaseholder. So it's a guarantee to us. It's not a guarantee to them, but obviously through us it's them.
Okay, so if the roof leaked after 8 years and we had to repair it, that wouldn't be an extra charge to the leaseholder? Or
There's always circumstances that are particular around a leaking roof, but if it was down to defective workmanship, which we could demonstrate, and not a new problem, etc., and it wasn't guttering and it wasn't rainwater goods, etc., then yes, we would get the works for free, and therefore we would not be passing anything on. And I have to add, we would be getting the works for free on behalf of the tenants that were also in the block, and so our interests are aligned with the leaseholders. We are shoulder to shoulder with them, because any savings that we make for leaseholders and the value for money we secure for leaseholders, we are also securing for our own housing revenue account and our tenants to allow our money to go further and to invest in tenants' homes.
Councillor Fahy, did you have a related question as well?
There's obviously a lot of concern around leaseholders, and appreciate the comments you made about transparency. But in circumstances where a contract overruns, an extension is given, so therefore it enhances the price of the contract, which then seems to be passed on to the leaseholder. So they, as well as everybody else, suffer from a cost of living crisis. So what reparation do leaseholders have in arguing the case that if contracts overrun and there is a responsibility of the contractor, shouldn't the contractor accept that liability rather than being additional costs being passed on to the leaseholder?
Thank you, Councillor Fahy. So we do sometimes have contracts that overrun. The vast majority of the overrunning contracts is we discover things as we undertake the works. Sometimes we discover groundworks are harder and there are abnormals in that. Sometimes we discover asbestos that was not revealed on our initial surveys. Sometimes we need to reframe our provision because we need, I don't know, recently in a boiler house replacement, we discovered that we needed more powerful boiler room engines to deal with the hybrid nature of the heat pump and the gas boiler. Now, those are examples. Now, sometimes contractors submit claims that are over and above what's legitimate. Fortunately, we employ directly a team of quantity surveyors that scrutinise the bills, not just at the end, but at each contract point, month by month, for each payment, to scrutinise how much we pass on, and we also have a stable of third-party consultants who will act as bring further expertise to double-check the work of our quantity surveyors to make certain that we are acting as a robust client. And I can point to a significant number of contracts where we have negotiated and refused to pay and then pushed down the bill significantly, where contractors have tried it on, potentially, to make certain that we are securing the best value for the HRA and also leaseholders. and driving those costs down. So at the point at which we are, and we do occasionally bring forward reporting that there has been a cost extension to the contract, it's not because we have, I don't know, let go of that clienting of the contract. It's because there have been additional works which we've had to secure. In those circumstances, we will have to be in a position, and we obviously will have audited final accounts that we share with leaseholders to pass on to leaseholders their share of those costs. I have to say this is in a significant minority of our cases. This is not common or garden. I can think of maybe 3 significant contract extension reports, one of which was called in. I mean, you may have even been on the call-in panel, Constable Frey, I can't remember. You know, it's happened 3 or 4 times out of a programme over the last 5-6 years of over 100 different packages of works.
Thank you. If we could move on to the converting voids to temporary accommodation. Firstly, can I just say, I think you and your team have done a brilliant job in reducing the cost of temporary accommodation over this year. It has been incredible what you've managed to save, given the scale of the crisis we were facing. And I think it's a great idea to convert the voids to temporary accommodation. It's just a practical point. Why would somebody who has one of those voids in temporary accommodation, given the length of our council housing waiting list, ever move out? Because it's surely going to be difficult to move into the private sector. There's a 7 to 8 year waiting list. So is it in effect causing an awful lot of people to jump the queue into sort of more sort of safer council accommodation? Thank you.
So in the conversations that we've been having at officer and me level and other cabinet colleagues, jumping the queue or not has been 100% at the top of my mind because I'm not having it. And so there are all sorts of safeguards that we put in place. Don't forget, some of the people, though, in there in temporary accommodation have also been on our waiting lists in many ways for quite a long time and are pretty high priority anyway. But yeah, it's for sure been a rubric through our discussions that should not be what happens. To the point about whether people would then want to leave the void, I'm going to hand that over to Jamie as to how we prevent that.
So just a little aid memoir, I suppose we wouldn't describe it as a queue, probably. We'd describe it as a register where people on the same band then are, when they bid, are able to access in date order. So that's, I know it's a nuance, but therefore the bands move down in that order. So we've got about, as you will read from this report, 50, potentially rising to 150 new HRA, if you like, properties that we're using for temporary accommodation, and that contrasts to about 650 other properties, some of which are on estates, some of which are on streets, which are in the general fund. All of those are at a rent that's pegged to local housing allowance, which is about £250 a week, and our social rents are £100, well, £120 a week. So there is a significant lower rent. Now that's not always a factor for every single resident, but normally it's a significant factor. And also we strongly encourage residents to keep bidding, and it's very bad practice for our TA to get stuck and residents to stay there for a very, very long time, longer than they should.
Thank you. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you raised temporary accommodation. Credit where credit is due. I think it's the standout innovation success story, financial success story as well. 75% reduction in costs. I think that's really impressive. So I wanted to say that. I've got a couple of questions on the hardship fund and the bad debt provision, those sort of 2 related topics. So the hardship fund is obviously something we worked on together last year. It's the first time, that was the first time that I think anybody can remember both the Labour and Conservative groups cooperating on a budget amendment, which I was grateful to the Cabinet member for. And that led to the hardship fund being reviewed and extended from £180,000 to £307,000. And I was given some pre-Christmas reading by Jamie and his team, which is the report of the full review of the extension of the hardship fund, which is just absolutely fantastic. And I'd commend it to all members with some great sort of real human stories, case studies about how that hardship fund has helped people cope with that very significant rent rise. So my question is, the hardship fund continues in this HRI MTFS, which is great, but there has been a change in approach. It's now a lower level overall, and the balance of funding is different. So there's £100,000 of grants available and £100,000 effectively for advice and support. And I support that, as you'd expect me to, but it does mean less grants going out the door. So I just wondered what the rationale for that change was, and also on the advice component, how will the outcomes be measured? So perhaps the first question to the Cabinet member and the second to Jamie, perhaps.
Yeah, you're quite right to make that observation that it is a change of the delivery model for the hardship fund going forward, and that's a direct effect of our learning from the first 2 years of the fund's operation. The principle of the fund, just to remind people, is not just to write off arrears and then for people to continue racking up arrears. If that is the case, then it has failed. The principle of the fund is to deal with a one-off arrears situation, and through doing that, enable and support tenants to be able to stick to a repayment plan for the remaining arrears, and then stick to, if you like, when that's paid off, their standard rent payments throughout the year. And so we're both, you can describe it as behaviour change, you can describe it as investment in their capacity to manage their finances, whichever way around you do it, it has the desired effect. We had some successes in the first 2 years, and we had some failures where we lost less success, where we made, if you remember, it's up to £5,000. We made it up to £5,000 write-off, and those arrears continued for whatever reason, and all sorts of individual circumstances that were wrapped up in that. In that situation, we concluded that it was actually more efficacious to give slightly smaller write-offs, smaller levels of write-off, but greater level of support, greater level of advice and support. So the mix between officer advice and support and those staff and the actual amount that was written off has slightly changed. The anticipation is to have a broadly similar number of client base, if you like, number of residents who are in financial difficulties and arrears. This does link in as well with one of our existing PIDs that has been savings proposals that have been identified, where we talk about using our technology. I'm just trying to remind myself of the number. PID number 3, rent and FTA arrears reduction, where we're looking to use some technology, and the word that is described to you is predictive analytics. It's using what we know about sometimes our residents to allow us to anticipate when they're slipping into arrears, and obviously that's you know the cutting edge. But we know that there's been some success with other tenants in other authorities, and we're looking to mirror that approach. So alongside that work around predictive analytics and the hardship fund, we think that those are very complementary approaches, and we're hoping to continue to be able to see the same effect. And the outcome would be that reduction in arrears and the number of residents that are returning to an arrears plan and then sticking to their repayment plan, and that would be success.
Okay, thank you for the reassurance on the number of people affected. And can I just take it then, you're satisfied that the outcomes measurement of the advice component is in place robustly, and you know, has that been interrogated given the changes to the scheme?
That's quite a detailed question. I think I've had a proposal from quite an experienced part of my service, proposing how this model is going to work. The outcome to my head is in what happens with the residents. So to a certain extent, exactly what the staff are doing on a day-to-day basis, the inputs, if you like, I am confident in the skill set of the very experienced staff that are doing this. But I will be, and we will be monitoring the outcomes in terms of arrears and the impact for that cohort of residents.
Okay, thank you. And as you said, it's preventative, and that's its power. This is a preventative scheme, and it's financed in this sophisticated way, really, which is to repurpose bad debt provision. So you can either let arrears build up and then write it off through bad debt provision, or you can spend it in this way that the council is doing. The bad debt provision for 25-26 is 858,000, and that kind of suggests the funding for the hardship fund is about sort of 19%, so £200,000 for the hardship fund out of what was just over £1 million, total bad debt provision before that financing. So that level has that been interrogated? So are we because we've had discussions, Jamie, about where you calibrate that level of funding for the hardship fund. Could we go further this year? What's the kind of view on that?
I suppose that my feedback from the team, and this is detailed stuff, is that they are beginning to recognise and flag where the approach works, and there are some indicators where it works, and where the approach has not worked. It's been for the 2 years we've been running it. Sometimes positive engagement to a point, then the arrears write-off, then much worse engagement, and then not a pattern of recovering from debt. So I think their view of the right balance is about that 20% at this stage. We will, as ever, keep it under review because it's in our interests, obviously, to help as many of our residents exit from arrears and drive down the total number of arrears for the HRA. So I feel comfortable that we've got the balance right for this year, but absolutely at the end of the year, I think we'll review it, and certainly we would bring forward as sort of an item next year to say, what have we learned, and then what are the next steps forward for this?
I only want to add, probably less technical, more layperson speak. We probably all know people in our lives who we may have lent a few bob to, and then they pop up again a few months later for some more bobs, rather than any kind of behaviour change. So this is, as you said, Councillor Hartley, this is about sustainability and future-proofing so that people don't get back into that debt, because we can't afford, neither is it moral really, to carry on bailing the same people out. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question on the tenant management organisations. I think in particular the one that's been deregistered by the Financial Conduct Authority. Should we not be considering exiting that arrangement entirely if they've been deregistered by the Financial Conduct Authority rather than just reducing their staffing budget?
Absolutely, both things are going on. So we're looking at, different models, talking to the tenants, of course, because I think they've got an appetite for remaining as a TMO, by and large. Jamie might be able to say a bit more about the technicality of the model and all the rest of it. The financial bit is important, partly because they're overfunded and partly for equity. So our tenancy officers currently have a number of homes they look after is about 1,000, maybe a bit less or more in some cases, and we're funding a whole tenancy officer in one of those TMOs for 88 properties. It's just not sustainable. So that change is coming. As is the negotiation around which model and all the rest of it. I don't know if there's an update you can share. Some of it's a little bit confidential. There may not be.
Yeah, I think the two issues that are alluded to here are separate and unrelated. I think my experience of TMOs in this borough and other boroughs actually is that they're very popular with residents, and residents feel they've got that closer control and inverted commas ownership of that. That's to be celebrated. So celebrate the successes, but we've got to make certain that it's not down to just we're throwing lots of money at it. It should be about that greater sense of control, ownership, and effectiveness, and sometimes small is beautiful. And so we've got to get the balance right, and also sometimes they do need a bit of support with their governance, because when you're in a small group of residents, some years not everyone wants to roll up their sleeves and be treasurer and the rest of it, and that was one of the snags that we hit with that registration issue with the FCA. So we are trying to regularise that and then move forward, we think, in a more balanced set of allowances. I'm sure that won't be the most easy conversation to have with residents, but we think it's the fairest in terms of the wider.
Thank you. That's really helpful and a lot clearer than what was in the report, so I feel a bit more comforted now. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Richards-Cotell.
Thank you very much. And can I just commend your team for lots of the really good work that's been going on within your department. Could you speak a bit more about the tenancy officers? I know there's several in my patch who are doing really great work and often working very complicated cases, but as you allude to, they look after very large patches. And I know you've got this Rethinking Tenancy project going on, but maybe if you could say a bit more about how, with increases in rent and service charge, will residents sort of and staff see that reflected in sort of the tenancy officers in either hiring more or etc.
So this is very much in my sights and has been for some time, the Rethinking Tenancy programme. It got a bit delayed because, the same senior managers who would lead that were also leading the work on temporary accommodation, which, actually I was at a local government association meeting this morning, which was discussing, and it was a nationwide conversation about temporary accommodation, and Greenwich were mentioned in dispatches as progressive and effective in this area. And also they were praising Jamie and his colleagues for their collegiateness in sharing, which hopefully they're going to monetize at some point, charging a fee. So, sorry, moving back. So it's a bit behind when I would have liked it to be, but it's now, the programme of work is now in train. I attended a meeting Monday, Tuesday, whatever, to see the different strands of work that are coming forward. We've got some good resources from digital who are helping us map things and provide more performance data, for an example, which is one of the things that I think we're lacking. To your point, so yeah, this is a service that's under a lot of stress. There are vacancy levels, and if you know you're going to be looking after 1,000 homes, it's not necessarily the most attractive post in London. So it is limping along, and you're right, those who are in place usually do their very best. The cohort of residents whom they are looking after has changed dramatically over the last 20 or fewer years, because we're largely speaking only able to house the most needy and or the most vulnerable, which means they spend far more time on issues around mental ill health, definitely around poverty, entrenched unemployment, and all the rest of it. And that's incredibly time-consuming. So the model we're looking at, well, we don't yet know the model we're looking at. That's the next phase. We're in discovery phase. I believe that's a technical term as part of these programs. We're in discovery phase, but the model will be either do you need more tenancy officers, or do you, for example, give them a different resource? Do they have their own dedicated housing mental health team, as an example? And we've completely got to look at that in terms of what will work for the customer and what's affordable. So it's quite interesting, and I'll be looking for members actually to challenge us as I report back to people about what we think we're discovering. Thanks.
Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at table 4.5.1, which is the performance of current efficiency savings that were already in train. And that table shows that the estimates of income from the various efficiency programs has been reprofiled very dramatically, with some very significant reductions in expected savings, particularly around rent arrears reduction and also repairs service. So could I ask, and the reasons have been given for why that reprofiling has been done, but could I ask, what is the council's level of confidence that those revised figures aren't going to sink even further, and that we're not going to have further delays on those programmes?
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. So I'll take saving number 3 first, rent and FTA arrears. I'll work on the rent and FTA arrears, and particularly this saving is related to predictive analytics that I was referring to earlier. This package of work is now within our Rethinking Tenancy programme that Councillor Slattery was just talking about. The team that is supporting this programme will be the same team and was the same team that was focusing on TA cost reduction last year. So we had to reprioritise, and if you like that, there's been a rightward slip on the savings in the HRA, but a leftward move in the general fund, and we thought that was the right priorities. But therefore, I am quite confident, given the pedigree of the team, that we're going to make good steps on that. The other one that may have drawn your attention is looking at the repairs and compliance capacity. This is really unpicking our productivity in our repairs service, and we have had some structural issues in the productivity of repairs service around, for no fault of the staff, the fact that the productivity arrangement for the staff was hard to monitor and didn't always deliver the right incentives for staff. We've been through quite an extensive process to negotiate changes to that productivity agreement, and in fact move to a flat rate over time, with appropriate protections, etc., etc. And that will make performance management and, in fact, staff relations far cleaner and more transparent and you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Successful. And in fact, this move to the flat rate was supported by a very significant majority of the staff affected. So we're very pleased that change has happened, and that we therefore, now that change has happened, I'm really confident that that revised profile can come through, because it's baked into the agreement with staff.
Okay, thanks. That's really clear. That's a very helpful answer. And I've got a question on right to buy, if I may, Chair. At the Audit and Risk Management panel, we heard an astonishing story about right to buy and the consequences of the Chancellor's advance notice of 3 weeks for her significant cutting of the right to buy discount. And we were told that within a 3-week period, because the Chancellor had given that 3 weeks head start, really, for people to put right to buy applications in, the Council received 1,022 applications, and we normally would have had about 30 in that time. The service had just had limited assurance in internal audit, so effectively, huge demand, service tips over. I've been advised that financially, that should work itself out, because the right to buy fees cover the actual work. But the resourcing implication of that enormous demand coming in because of the Chancellor's sequencing of that decision, I got 2 questions, really. Is that resourcing challenge that the team are working through now reflected in this HRA MTFS? So the first question is it reflected in the MTFS? Have we covered the enormous work that's been created by that policy error, I would say, nationally? And secondly, have you lobbied central government for new burdens funding? Because it feels to me that if central government has created this problem, councils like Greenwich should be able to have new burdens funding to cope with it.
This is a challenge, and you would imagine it's quite hard to pick up agency staff with detailed right to buy skills at the moment for obvious reasons. That said, we have had experience at working through peaks and troughs in right to buy applications in the past. Well, 1997 there was quite a big peak as well. And in other services as well, like sort of have experienced peaks and troughs. I am confident in the ability of the service to flex, and if need be, we will be able to look at staff from other parts of our income service to help us deal with the glut. We do have time as well to process these applications, and I think the audit that was received in that committee was around making certain we've done the appropriate anti-fraud checks, and we certainly will not be shirking from those, especially following these good recommendations of internal audit. New burdens money, the HRA is recently secured that CPI +1 rent settlement, which was something that was for 5 years and consulting for longer, which was quite a significant degree of stability into housing owned accounts. And there are other aspects of opportunities to secure additional monies into the HRA that are probably greater than this glut. Obviously, I would never refuse new burdens monies, but if I was to list where I think there are opportunities to lobby government to secure more resources into our housing owned accounts with a clear argument and clear audit trail, there'd probably be bigger sums under those listed under 4.8.4.
Okay, thank you. I suppose your answer has got to the nub of my question, really. You know, I'm taking it from the answer that additional resource. You said, you know, the rent, the maximum rent increase of 2.7%. You referred to that in your answer. I'm concerned that the costs of dealing with this surge in demand is being borne by our tenants through the rent rise effectively. And that's why I asked if resource had been made within the HRA. So I suppose I just want to put the question really to the Cabinet member. It's a constructive suggestion. Councillor Hyland took it away from ARM and I think was going to raise it with you. I really think there's a local government-wide lobby that should be made to central government. It's a one-off problem because of the way that announcement was made. I just don't think it's fair that council, our HRA fund, and therefore our tenants, should be bearing the cost of the resourcing challenge.
I think it is self-funding by the fee, so it wouldn't come out of rents.
The resourcing to process this enormous surge in application is costing presumably extra now. And that's the challenge that I think the service are going through.
I'm not sure of the details of how Jamie will temporarily resource it and then pay itself back at the. But
happy to pick it up separately if that's for the
I
benefit of the meeting.
wouldn't be wanting. I would tenants pay for other people's right to buy. So no, I don't think that's an issue.
The cost of the processing of the applications.
That
the surge.
can't be. Yeah.
As you observed earlier, there is always a fee associated with that. So if we've got a surge in applications, we also happily have a surge in fees. So there's a bit of a cash flow issue potentially because the fees might come in and take time to be processed and come through. But I think the materiality of this is something we can manage within the cash flow of the HRA, and certainly by the end of the year, it'll even itself out.
I was just going to come on a point, Chair, because I understand the question from Councillor Hartley, but just to point on the record that this is the policy announces very much a call to action by the local government. So I don't think it is necessarily per se a mistake. This is actually a policy brought in to protect and keep social homes from being reduced from right to buy. And I think the urgency done by the Chancellor is really to protect social homes. So I think that's why we want that urgency. It's been a long-term call from local government to make sure that we have reduce almost the discount that was going out so much. And I think that's the reason for the urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs of the policy. I have a different view on that. It was in the manifesto and things. I just wish there hadn't been this 3-week window, as I'm sure the service does, because it's created this surge in demand. But I just wanted to come back on that. Thank you, Chair.
I have to say, Chair, we are quite used to such windows. We have done that in other departments. I think we've seen councils have to be given payments from central government without necessary resource. We do see that quite a lot, and it's a fair point, but one that we deal with quite a lot in local government. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Yeah, while we're on right to buy, once we do get through this glut, I guess, of right to buy applications, do we have an estimation of how many fewer houses we're likely to lose every year as a result of the sort of change in policy? And if we do have an estimation, do you know how this might impact long-term sort of planning for the HRA?
We think it will be pretty much a trickle. Like, this is a total guess because it's so early doors, but I think it will be, well, what it was before the announcement was about 50 to 60 per year. So it will be significantly less than that, put it that way.
And I guess because it's going to be significantly less, do we know how this might impact our long-term planning, financial planning for the HRA? Is there going to any thoughts on that?
So we have made some planning assumptions into the MTFS. We've modelled out the peak and then the drop-off. There are obviously positives to the peak as well. We keep all the receipts now, and so we will have a positive glut of receipts which can be targeted to our development programme, but then a drop-off, and obviously there's receipts that will no longer be available, say after this burst in, say in 3-4 years' time. But equally, we won't be losing rents, because we will still be holding on to the social tenancies. So it is a little bit swings and roundabouts. But we have modelled all of that into the forecast that you're reviewing today.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so thank you very much. Are there any comments that we would like to make for Cabinet to consider? It didn't seem that any came out there. No? Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 6. Councillor Hyland, do you want to come to the table, please? And I think Damon's on his way. Great, thank you. So we're on to item 6, which is to receive the MTFS for 25-26 and to submit any comments to Cabinet. Councillor Hyland, would you like to make some opening comments?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very grateful. I think what's important to say is that we've been pretty much lost 53% of our funding since 2010, that local government is recognised to be structurally underfunded, and it needs the government to look at the way councils are funded. We are victims, if you like, of demand and inflation. The population is getting older. Situations are far more complex. So, for example, young people with special educational needs will find that their situations have become more and more complex, so that a placement, for example, could be up to £1 million a year. Now, £1 million a year is the equivalent of 1% on the council tax. So you can just imagine that if we were able to stop these private companies profiteering from looking after young people, that in fact, we could stem the council tax rises. Of the just under 200 people who replied to the consultation, about half of them were against council tax rises. But most of them understood the battle that this council has to try and grow to meet the demand, whilst at the same time actually making swinging cuts. And as you can see from the cuts that we are trying to make, one of which, of course, was Marion Wilson Animal Park. Should the council really be running an animal park, you know? Actually, the community stood up and said, this is very, very dear to us. And the council does listen to its community and does hear people. And we have responded appropriately with that one and withdrawn that proposal. Now, everybody's looking for sponsorship for everything. Whether we will be able to attract sponsorship for things that we are having to cut, like Sparkle in the Park, which is about £70,000 a year, or whether we will have to say to ourselves, well, we'll have to limit it, or we just can't do it every year. Those are the kind of decisions that we're having to make. There isn't the fat on the land that there once was 20 years ago. You know, it's just not there anymore. And having to save 40 million next year and 100 million the year after, before council tax rise or before government grant, it's a lot to have to deal with. Now, we are next year going to have to save 43.4 million at the moment. And I can talk you through what has created that gap if you want me to, but we have a route to absolutely balance those figures. And again, if you needed me to, I could talk you through that. There are still outstanding issues, for example, national insurance, that the government, as we know, put up the national insurance for businesses and has said that we will be recompensed, but we don't quite know if that's going to be pound for pound, and we suspect that we won't get it all back. And even if we do, we're not sure that GSP and GSS, for example, will. But in addition to that, we're looking to try and invest not only in frontline services, but in the priorities of Anthony's administration. So, for example, the setting up of mental health hubs, for example, we are wanting to transform rather than cut things like the adventure playgrounds. But libraries will be affected because nothing escapes when you're having to cut such an amount of money out of an ever-decreasing budget. Now, the government have given us a one-year settlement, and they've promised that actually they will look at local government over more years, a couple of years at least, if not 3, to actually give us a more stable footing. We have obviously key decisions to make, but it's really important that we keep our priorities and those frontline services going. You'll notice that I think it's Bristol that are emptying the bins now once a month. We're still doing that fortnightly collection of the black bin and a weekly, at the moment, collection of the other 2 bins. We're still sweeping the streets, although we've changed the regime so that it's a more common sense approach. So town centres and busy places are done more regularly than a street where I live, which is very quiet. And I think if Anthony, do you want to come in there and say anything? And Damon?
Thank you very much, Denise. And Chair, just to present our budget for 25-26, just reflections from myself. continuously every year when we go to set the budget, it's something that becomes even more and more challenging. And I think we can all recognise the way the narrative around public services is at the moment. But continuously we keep looking for how we reimagine services, how we reform services, and more importantly, how we invest in our services. So on the table, you'll see how we're strategically using Section 106 for our carbon offsetting to invest in community energy, to support people and organisations to help our residents tackle the energy crisis that is plaguing people's homes. There's additional investment going into our wellbeing hubs, and as well as this doubling some of the funding going into road resurfacing and fixing potholes. So there's a budget here really that responds to our needs and that largely invests in our protect and frontline services. And you see the 20 million that goes into health and adults, 11 million. This is just so we can continue. It's not new additional growth. It's not new services. It's to stand still and keep delivering frontline services that responds to residents. And next year it gets challenging. Even more challenging. And what will be the game changer from central government is how they respond to the local government sector's call to action around 3-year settlements. Having to be able to plan a budget over 3 years gives us real strategic power in really thinking about how we deliver services and gives us time to reform. Because delivering services while trying to reform them at the same time, manage overspends and then find cuts is a lot of work to do in 1 year. So, you know, we meet this challenge every year though, and I'm grateful to officers and their work collectively with the Cabinet who are here today to speak to the panel, listen, answer questions, and speak to some of the recommendations that you may make today. Thank you.
Thank you. Damon, do you have any opening remarks or should we go straight into questions?
I'll probably keep it brief. If we turn the clock back to last year, we were sitting here reviewing 118 proposals. We were here till a good hour of the night. Not prejudging the length of the meeting tonight, but it was a good hour last year. And those 118 proposals were a really significant amount, you know, almost like 10% of our net budget. It's a really significant amount to try and deliver. And obviously that takes time, and, you know, those proposals are sort of, you know, delivering and unwinding over the next sort of couple of years. So this year's seen a slightly different approach, and I think it's different in two ways. The first one really is just reflecting on those numbers. This year, given that we've, you know, gone through a process already of identifying a lot of areas, some of which are quite small in value, the approach this time has been to look at maybe fewer items but slightly larger in size. Makes it a little bit easier to, you know, sort of take them through the process, because, you know, we have been through looking, reviewing, and that's why you ended up with 118 last year. This year I think it's been good, I suppose in a different way. It's felt a very sort of collaborative process with officers and members, with GMT and Cabinet working hand in hand through, you know, sitting there at the beginning, looking at, you know, proposals, you know, and bringing them into being, and then working through those all the way through the process through the Greenwich Strategic Leadership Team. So it's been a very collaborative process the whole way through, and that's resulted in the proposals that we have in front of us tonight. I think the last thing I would reflect on is, I know that when I talk to my peer group, I can't convey how they feel adequately in this room. Some of my peers are dealing with some really difficult positions across London and beyond as well. I think Greenwich is in a relatively decent position. compared to some of our peer group. And that is some comfort, I think.
Thank you. Just for the committee's awareness, the way I'm going to run questions for this section is, firstly, any questions, sort of more general questions on the financial context or the makeup of the budget and the sources of income, I'll take first. And then after that, we can go through the savings and income proposals sort of one by one, because I know that's where people will have detailed questions. So if we do it one by one, it makes sure that we're focusing on one thing at a time. So I will start with the more general questions. Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three, so forgive me on that point. On the general point, I think I have a view which probably isn't shared in this room or shared outside it, really, that in one respect, the challenges facing local government is one where central government control what we do. And I think if we are to develop a sense of localism, then it ought to be about empowering councillors and councils to decide their priorities and council tax in the short and longer term. Because I was interested in Councillor Hyland's point about the issue regarding 100 people said, we don't have any more council tax. And if we're charged with the responsibility that our residents don't appreciate what we're doing in terms of providing a quality service, then why not give them each a broom so they sweep their own streets, rather than simply saying, well, we don't have any more tax. But if we need quality services, then I think we need to look how we develop the longer-term agenda. So in relation to the budget generally, I noticed in a paper I read today that government are looking at the question of reducing the level of consultants and agency staff in government. And they're reducing their budget from £12 billion to £1.7 billion. And I was intrigued by the fact that Greenwich currently spends something like 5.9 million on consultants and agency staff. So it does seem to me, and this is a bone of contention I've had forever really, that we need to start looking at how this can be radically reviewed. Because if we can reduce our spend on consultants and agency staff, then that helps us to achieve other things within the budget process. And the other point I wanted to make is that I noticed in a paper that we have allocated £5 million for risk reserve. Is that risk reserve 5 million to cover potential future pressures on budget, or is it going to be used for this year? And the other point I wanted to make on a general point is I understand that we have received something like 7.2 million from Comer Homes in relation to the public inquiry that was held. So is that 7.2 million going into reserves, or is it going to be used for the purposes of assisting to manage this budget at this point in time? I understand that may not be the case, but I think it would be helpful to deal with that. And the last point I want to make, appreciate that everybody has decided to accept the views of residents with regard to Marion Wilson Park. But there's a line in the paper we have this evening which says we're going to remove it for this year. And I think the residents and users of the service need certainty. And if anybody wanted some reassurance, I've tried to find the report that we published in 2011, which gives us a way forward in running that park in a very efficient way. As we're moving to a cooperative council, I think there's a large activity out there that we can achieve a better solution and for future generations to enjoy the park. But I think that's a plus, and congratulations to everybody that's been involved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fahy. Quite a lot there. Councillor Karakay, did you want to start with the response? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you, Councillor Hartley, for your question, and note the fact that we are already a cooperative council and doing cooperative things. So first of all, on the point on the animal park, it would be nice if I bring that clarity. When I mentioned it was off the table, it was off the table and so forth. And that is off the table compounding into next year. So that's the position on that, and I hope that clarifies that. You're right on the point about service efficiencies and agency spend. Obviously, within local government, there is always going to be a need for some form and level of agency. We use it in different departments, but more importantly, it's about how we get people into permanent jobs where they can work for the authority. And I believe we also have a agency review that is really trying to get that agency spend down. And it's those long-term agencies that we really want to get people off, which is working. And I'm sure Councillor Highland or Damon can speak to that for you. On your other question on the circa 7 million from Coma Homes and the appeal that we launched to take action against the unlawful development that was built by them, that is not money in the bank as of yet. They still have to submit planning applications. And obviously Section 106 and C was subject to an agreement for specific things as agreed with the developer, which the planning inspector helped us agree with. Now, they have a period to pay that. So it's not currently money that sits in a reserve or anywhere. It's not paid to the council. We don't currently have that. And obviously they have to pay that to us. I believe there was one other question there.
5 million.
The 5 million on the risk reserve. I'll hand over to Damon to speak to that point. Thank you.
Yes, that will be used this year to combat overspend.
Was there anything you wanted to add, Damon?
No, I mean, I'm just, yeah, I'll cover that one as well. So yeah, just on the back of that risk reserve as well. So obviously that was the revenue monitor report that was considered by Cabinet only yesterday was basically showing that that sum will be consumed in the year 24-25, i.e. this financial year. And sort of linked to that, you know, the segue back into the budget for next year is that we've obviously had to build in effectively what is a structural deficit into next year's numbers. Just going back on the very first point about the the agency spend, I'm aware of the information obviously that was been provided and you've quoted from this evening, and would reflect that that shows that the amounts being spent on agency are down.
Thank you. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a set of questions on the main report. Is that okay to dive in? Great, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Whatever anybody thinks of any individual budget decisions, we're all grateful for the huge amount of work that goes into preparing the medium-term financial strategy, not just the Director of Resources, but the whole Cabinet. And on a purely process level, I just think the machine is really humming, this continuous medium-term financial strategy process. So separate to policy decisions, I just wanted to say that's really to GMT's credit. My first question is kind of a big picture question, and it's for the Cabinet member, as most of my questions are. So this year's financial settlement from central government was an increase of 17.7 million core. That's pretty much in line with the last few years. So 2 years ago, it was £23 million increase. Last year, 15 million, 17 million this year. It's pretty much in line with what we've seen recently. And all eyes are on the spending review. So could I ask the Cabinet member, from her conversations, what is your level of confidence that that situation, the level of increase that Greenwich will be getting from central government, what's your level of confidence that that's going to improve in any meaningful way in the coming years?
I think we're hearing good rhetoric from the new government around their understanding of local councils and the need for local government to have more devolution. The problem is the national picture, we're broke. And so the heart may be willing, you know, but the means to the end is just not there at the moment. And that's why the Chancellor's looking for growth. And I'm sure once that growth comes, investment in public services will flow. But I think we've a wait for that to happen yet.
Thank you. My next question is about the efficiencies, if I may, Chair. So last year there were originally £40 million of savings that went into the MTFS process, and that became, through the process, 33.7 million. And the rest, the difference, was sort of a pipeline of ideas and proposals that came forward. The new savings brought forward for this MTFS amount to 1.2 million, climbing to 2.1 million. So there's a gap there. And could you just give us a sense, again, the Cabinet member, could you give us a sense of what, if any, the future pipeline of already identified savings looks like that haven't been brought forward this year?
So we're back to The Road Not Taken. A wonderful poem that you know all about. It's impossible for me to sit here and talk about ideas that people have had that we've not pursued, because you end up back with the animal park again, don't you? You know, that you pursue something that, on balance, you think, well, maybe we shouldn't have pursued that, because actually the benefit to society seems a lot greater than the actual amount of cash that you'd finally save. But we're all scratching our heads, all of us, looking all the time at how we can make those savings. Damon and the Chief Exec have been looking at all the posts across the council, looking at agency spend, looking at the length of an agency contract, looking at whether a consultant is needed 5 days a week and how many weeks they're needed. And it's been through more or less a star chamber process. Nothing is getting past the microscope of cuts and efficiencies, because they're not the same thing entirely, are they? But we try to give the best quality services at not the cheapest price, but at the optimum price. We know that when we put a contract out for procurement, you don't always take the cheapest price. You take the best price for the best on offer. And that's what this council is trying to do. So really, you've got a summary in the report of where the cuts are for next year, for 25-26. They're all summarised at the back of the report in the appendix. So really, that's where I would point you to, really. Damon, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add something on that, sort of some of the actions that are sort of ongoing at the moment. It builds on the point that I was making just now, which is back to the issue of like agency spend, which is down. We have some really enhanced recruitment controls in place now. There are now weekly meetings which involve some senior officers in the council reviewing the recruitment activity in the council. Those sessions have been, I think I would call, they're very informative. They've actually given us some really valuable insight into activities, around the council. Very simple things like just converting agency members of staff into, if it's a temporary arrangement, onto a fixed term contract, lower cost, benefits to the individual as well. But it's that additional insight that particular control that's giving us, because we're seeing what's coming through, why it's coming through, and where there are pressures in the organisation, and maybe we can, approach them differently. We get a very wide-angle lens on it. So you know, that's something that's been in place only probably since the summer, but is bearing fruit in both direct financial ways and, as I say, insight that will enable us to make more effective future decisions as well.
Councillor Hartley?
Thank you, that's helpful. On the efficiency savings, at 9.10, the report confirms that 2.4 million that was profiled to be saved in 2025-26 has been shifted back into later years. And that's obviously on top of the 10 million out of 33 million slippage reported to Cabinet. Could I just ask, what's that 2.4 million made up of? So we've got a departmental breakdown, but could you give us a sense of, you know, the big ticket items in there, and have you really interrogated that slippage as the Cabinet member?
Well, one was to do with children's centres, where, with the consultation period and so on. Sorry, my eyes are just not good enough.
I mean, in fact,
to read that. Can I ask Damon to help me out here? Thank you. Sorry, Damon, I can't see the spreadsheet.
No, that's fine. Obviously you've referenced a 10 million figure, which is in the revenue monitor, which was obviously considered yesterday. Now, that 10 million that's in there, that represents slippage that is in the year 24-25. Now, you know, a significant degree of that is slippage which wholly just sits within 24-25. Some of that will move into 25-26, but equally we have things in 25-26 that were originally scheduled for that year that will move into future years. So some of the bigger items that sit within that are not going to be a surprise, because they're things that are already you know, showing a slippage at the moment. So, for example, there are proposals around sort of creating more sort of residential provision. That's one of the sort of larger items, you know, within that category. Some of the digital budget savings as well, and again, you'll recognise that as being an item that's slipping in the current year. And the reason it's slipping in the current year feeds into next year as well, because a lot of those savings are actually locked in contracts, and the actual sort of price of unlocking that contract exceeds the benefit, so we will have to wait until that unwinds before we will secure it. On that digital side, we will secure those savings, but just in a future year. So they're, for example, you know, two of the more significant, they're probably two of the two largest that are sitting within that figure.
Can I just come in on that point? Because I guess this highlights the process of coming up with a budget and proposing savings, that it's subject to consultation, subject to conversations with potential partners. We saw the process of having multiple elections and had to defer consultations, and all of that has a knock-on effect. And even when we make savings within the budget, there still almost has to be a level of risk to cover those savings if they're not achieved. So just something worth highlighting in that sense. And all of our savings proposals are subject to some formulation of an estimate, which may not or may not be achieved.
Chair, I have 3 other topics on the main report. Shall I sort of let somebody else have a go and then come back?
I have one question, and is anyone else? We'll come back to you. So Damon, like, brilliant work from your team as always to try and get this balanced budget. It's a huge amount of work, particularly over the Christmas period every year. I think the only person who works harder than you over that period is Father Christmas himself. So, like, well done for all the work that you put into this. I'm very conscious of a couple of points that have been made about how difficult it is with the early settlements and everything else, and constantly having to find, to your point at the beginning, all the things you have to do in a year to try and make that work. Is there any scope, and to what extent are we looking at things like AI and investing in AI in order to create those efficiencies? Because when we're constantly looking at what we can cut, we also need to look at what we can invest in order to make those efficiencies for the future. So to what extent has that been considered?
Okay, so I'll start off. So I think it's fair to say that we already use, automation and in a number of our services already. So, for example, a really, really powerful example of that is our hotel optimization tool, which has really, really helped on our temporary accommodation sort of pressures that we've been experiencing over the last 18 months. That tool that's been developed basically enables us to determine the cheapest sort of prices that we can actually secure relevant accommodation for. This is revised like every 3 hours. That's how, sort of up to date we've managed to get things there. We have, in terms of supporting families, we've got tools that have been developed which basically pull data from multiple systems, matches them so we can get a really more complete view of families so we can support them in a more holistic manner. We have all sorts of bridging between different systems so that we can basically combine financial data with performance and activity data. Knowing that something costs you, £100 is very one-dimensional. Knowing what actually that £100 represented, how many people were behind it, and that actually gives you a start towards that insight that you're looking for. There's many other examples as well. And I mean, we can talk about artificial intelligence, but I'll pass to the Cabinet Member.
Yeah, I mean, we will be bringing a report through soon about the Council's use of AI, but it will feature quite prominently going forward, obviously. We have a financial bridge for both adults and children, which draws together data from the social care system and the financial system. Damon's mentioned the hotel optimization tool used by the housing officers, and that had emanated, that tool, from the IT department who developed that, so they can actually find the cheapest prices for the booking demands on the night. We have a housing fire vulnerability data set, which automatically pulls data from social care and housing tenancy to identify those that might struggle to exit a building in the event of a fire. And we've also introducing automatic transcription tools, which are really helpful for social care practitioners and education welfare and so on and so forth, helping them to spend more time with people and less time, writing stuff up. And we're also piloting a Microsoft Copilot as a way of making staff more efficient in terms of creating documents, summaries, and meeting notes. But we will publish all this in the coming months.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the first question's just been answered. So the second one was, with all the work that's gone into this, and we're going to deliver these cuts for next year, next year, are we going to then keep a close eye on departmental overspends? Because we don't want to go for all this pain and suffering and then it's even worse next year.
You want to go?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we're in a better, well, it might sound a bit weird to say, but we don't want to be in a position where we're underspending. We're in a position where we're just spending on bang on the money, but where there is going to be a level of overspends within our budget base. Now, the way we manage that is through our financial management boards, which is our forum led by the Cabinet Member for Finance to really challenge budgets that are giving us huge pressures. So we have a financial management board on finance, we have a financial management board on housing, we have a financial management board on transport and on children's and adult social care. So that is the forum for where we're going to be using our eyes, to really cast our eyes collectively with officers to make sure we are managing overspends, and in that regard meet the point that you make of how we critically analyze our budgets. And it's through our financial management board that work that you see collectively that you commended on housing was delivered. Thank you.
Councillor Richards-Cotell.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your and your team for your diligence in putting this budget together. I have two sort of kind of related questions. One, you spoke about having to repeat this process on an almost like yearly basis, and that's just the relentlessness of that. So I suppose one question is about, as you're going along, any sort of learnings or different approaches you've been taking over the last few years, and be interesting to hear what you've learned from that. And the second bit is really, I suppose, in your budget setting, is the actual sort of feasibility of implementing those sort of efficiency savings or cuts also part of the picture of what like any organisation can absorb. So I think you mentioned like last year there was about 118, I think, savings. This is a lot smaller. Is that also part of the sort of thinking about budget processing, about what realistically an organisation can deal with on a yearly basis?
I almost feel Damon's better to answer that because the stress hits him and his team. I mean, all I would comment on is that we're happy to take ideas from absolutely anybody and everywhere. We're very happy to hear public consultation, and in fact this week has been evidence of that, if anything. I think we learned about the amount of effort that went in last year for 118 proposals, and we thought this year it's got to be far less salami slicing and more kind of what is it that is the council's priorities, and how can we invest in those in a way that, you know, is a motivator for everybody, residents, staff, as well as councillors. Because there's nothing worse than working in an organisation that's miserable and depressing. And that is why it's so important to have a vision of what you want the borough to be achieving. And Anthony has set that vision out with his group. And of course, we have a very effective opposition that keeps us on our toes. And notwithstanding the scrutiny process itself. So we are able to invest in a cooperative commission. We are able to transform adventure playgrounds. We are, man cannot live by bread alone, they say. And so it's really important that we actually invest in culture as well, and we've seen that, and we're also seeing some of those voluntary organisations struggling without sponsorship. They're struggling, and I think that it's been a real challenge this year to try and help some of those cultural organisations, particularly, to stay on their feet. Yes, we've learned a lot of lessons. But I think the collaboration between everyone has absolutely paid off there, I would say. David?
And I'll just come in specifically about that point on lessons, because I think every year when we write a budget, there is always a level of learning. Now, the peer review spoke to that level of learning through the formulation of the Greenwich Strategic Leadership Team, which is a space that we have been collectively using to set the budget more and interrogate our budgets that we're bringing forward. But what's helpful is actually leaning on the wider leadership within the organisation. So, you know, our key officers are very much leaning on other leaders in the organisation at different levels. You know, thinking about how we have conversations collectively about where we save money and what kind of things we can do, and pulling up ideas from different levels of our staff force, and as well as leaning on councillors who make those suggestions themselves. But collectively, you know, when we did the budget last year, and I presume we'll do this again, surveying those who engaged with the budget process and thinking about how we get even better, those are lessons that we challenge ourselves with. And we also, as a cabinet, alongside our senior management team, sit down and challenge ourselves on actually what did we get right this year and what could be improved next year. Thank you.
And lastly, I mean, we're investing in our streets, for example, in the public realm, making them cleaner, safer and greener. And so it's very important to be able to do that alongside seeing actually things being reduced, you know. Over to you.
Yeah, probably now building on a couple of comments that have been sort of made already. I think the first thing was about learning from the process. And it's the first thing we did was as soon as we'd sort of set the budget was we surveyed. And I know you've mentioned, I'm sorry, no, the leader mentioned it. We did exactly the same at officer level. We went around the corporate senior leadership, asked for views, what had gone right, what had gone wrong. We got feedback from that. So I mentioned right at the very beginning about the more collaborative approach, the strategic leadership team, that sort of come out of it. We've had a more dedicated comms sort of channel this year within the senior officer group as well. So the information has been very free flowing, or very, very visible. I think it's fair to say, I mean, we sort of sat down, did a timetable right at the very start, and we went for a really conscious effort of we're going to try and get a position before we know the numbers, which is interesting, shall we say, amongst other things, and we did it. So we had all of those. What can the organisation absorb? It's a really delicate balancing act, and I think some of these have been mentioned already, because there is capacity in the organisation, but there's also morale as well. And 118 is a lot to swallow. It sucks a lot of capacity out of the organisation. You have to bring more in as well. But as part of the learning exercise, we don't just do this internally, we do it outside as well. So for example, if I look again back at my peer group, my deputy's peer group, etc., we have knowledge exchanges, we sit down, from time to time, exchange who's doing what are the initiatives, what have we missed, what have you done, so some councils who, so shall we say, are more financially distressed than we are at the moment. Don't get me wrong, everybody's in the queue. It's very difficult. We're just not the one that's on the edge. Learning from those that are further down the line. So, what have you done? Before you've got to the stage, what have we not done? And we hold ourselves, sort of open in that respect. But this is very difficult. But I think, going back to that bit about morale, I think the idea here is it's not about cuts, it's about reforming. And I think that's very important.
Councillor Cook.
I think kind of nicely following on from Maisie's question, I guess we've done some learning, but looking ahead, I guess what, if any, external factors are sort of concerning you, and how might the council be sort of preparing for them? I mean things like, the economy, inflation, government funding changes. What, looking ahead, is there anything that you're worried about, and how are we preparing?
Well, all of the above, including malicious hacking. When you see like the phlebotomy, managed to say that properly, being hacked into in such a malicious way for South London hospitals, nothing is sacred, is it? And we had a power outage, as you know, last year. And that was immediately, everybody were on their toes. Could this be? And as it happened, it was just two bits of kit that had been talking to each other for years, suddenly decided not to. But in the meantime, all the pipework had to be expanded to get the data out because of the, everything blocking up. So, there are existentialist threats out there, whether it's inflation, whether it's the economy, whether it's war. you know, whether it's the Middle East, Ukraine, Russia, parts that don't come into this country. I mean, my neighbour had his BMW steering wheel hacked off because with a chainsaw, because they can't get steering wheels for BMW because of the Ukraine war. I mean, it's just everywhere you look can be that kind of threat. Mass unemployment. You know, when I was, sorry to say this, I was kind of your age, I used to drive up Wellington Street and there'd be on Treasurer's Department how many millions of people were out of work in the country. And so things like depression, unemployment, boom and bust are probably the biggest things. But again, we have a terrible housing crisis. We have a situation where our housing department are working their socks off to get people out of hotels. And they're doing a cracking job, and it's really been helped, as I said, by the IT department with the hotel optimization tool. And they have managed to make the savings that the chair referred to earlier absolutely magnificent. And we have absolutely brilliant staff in this organisation who are so committed and so loyal that it's almost like a vocation. You know, they're like a stick of rock, cut them in half, and there'd be Greenwich written all the way through. It is brilliant, but we have to always be keeping the initiative and moving forward, because if we slip, then we're done for. And that is another reason why Damon and Debbie Warren and Anthony work so hard to stay either in prime position or in the herd and not be like one of the first organisations financially to be going over the cliff. And that's because people have dedicated their working lives to be on the front foot and to keep that initiative. I hope I haven't over-answered that.
Yeah, just building on that. I mean, certainly on the sort of the human side of this, there is a systemic problem when it comes to recruiting, you know, good professionals across the board at the moment. So, you know, whether it's planners or whoever, it's becoming more and more difficult. So that's a very sort of human risk that we've sort of got at the moment. And certainly within the pack, there's a full sort of risk sort of register which deals with, you know, a number of those issues. But back on the other side, I suppose we've mentioned the usual suspects in terms of sort of inflation and what have you. But what we've got coming up in the next 12 months is something that's been very, very long awaited, really, which is a funding reform. Local government funding has been crying out for reform for many, many years. It certainly looks like that is now firmly back on the agenda. That obviously brings, you know, potential risks with it, and we will have to wait and see. Clearly, when it comes to sort of funding local government, it's about initially what's the size of the pie that there is available for local government as a whole. And obviously that is, you know, that size, that allocation is one of those central decisions that we await from the spending review. And then after that comes the allocation of the pie. You know, how many, what pieces does it get cut into, and where does Greenwich fit into that? So we wait and see. I think, as was mentioned earlier, I think the comment was the words that have been mentioned so far are quite positive. So things like, if we look at the settlement that was announced in sort of mid-December, there was a new sort of item in there called a recovery grant, and you know, there were basically sort of three places where that funding was being directed when you look at the data. It generally went to those councils which were towards the north of the country, north east, north west, Humber, Tyneside, and West Midlands. But it also went to those councils that were more metropolitan, i.e. urban, that's Greenwich, and also those that show sort of degrees of deprivation, Greenwich again. So if that is, and this is a new line that was put in, so if that is a sign of things to come, then that is potentially a positive, but all eyes are on the spending review.
Councillor Hartley, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just thank Councillor Hyland for the crafty compliment she snuck in for the effectiveness of the opposition. I think she's trying to butter me up before the budget debate, is my theory. I've got a question prompted by your excellent question, Chair, about artificial intelligence and innovation. And as we said earlier, the hotel optimization tool is just a really stunning example of innovation and reform. And it's just prompted me to think, we've invested in the development of that tool through our digital team and resources. And temporary accommodation, hotel booking is a challenge facing all authorities. So I suppose there are two approaches. You could be altruistic and you could open that tool out to all local authorities. But equally, we invested as a council in developing it. So is there an opportunity when we do innovate to recharge some of the costs, at least, of innovating to other authorities? And then everybody wins.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We have talked about whether it's reasonable, is it possible, etc. It's not simple. But what I would say is that we had a number of conversations with London councils, i.e. the organisation, and London councils is now looking to sort of develop, an appropriate tool for the benefit of the wider London community, off the back of the good work that's been done, by this council. I mean, back to your original question, if there are clear opportunities, we will look to secure them. But I think, this council has developed something which can benefit not just us, but a lot of people, and we're open to, helping others.
I'm glad to hear it's been looked at, because I'm not talking about making a profit out of this. It's about defraying the costs that we have developed. And I just think that could be a really fruitful area, possibly for a recommendation from the panel. I've got questions on national insurance for either the leader or the cabinet member. So the Chancellor's national insurance hike, when that was announced in the budget, there was some confusion across local government about what that would mean. And the leader of the council in December told me at full council that local authorities were getting a pound-for-pound rebate. But then in this report at 5.7, I picked up the curious wording that says there is the expectation that public sector organisations will be compensated for increased NI, which doesn't really fill me with confidence. So I think we need some clarity. Is Greenwich being fully refunded for its national insurance costs or not?
Well, frankly, we have to wait until our financial settlement. So hopefully 9th of February.
I haven't got a date.
Oh. No. Well, I might know something you don't know.
I might be told something.
We don't know at the moment, but when the financial settlement comes, that should be clearer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And two other questions on this topic. So you mentioned earlier the national insurance impact on GSP and GSS, which we do know will be borne by those subsidiaries. Have we quantified that, and what will that mean, covering those costs? And then the second one is sort of the same question, but for all of our suppliers. So what's the national insurance impact, the impact of our suppliers as a council's, their national insurance hikes on the price that we will be paying for contracts and procurement and services?
Well, that will be affected when we renegotiate, but it's not a factor right now because they're completely tied up. GS plus GSS and indeed the HRA, same thing, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there's a combination of factors in there. There's national insurance and London living wage, so it's a complex picture. And I mean, the other thing to bear in mind is that certainly in sort of social care, where you have sort of a low relative wage, then the NI and you know, that can make up a quite significant percentage of the overall bill. So we were sort of clear when bringing all of this together that departments look at their you know, their contracts, their costs, and put together what they think they need for next year. So that's the process that's been undertaken. In terms of actually trying to divorce out the specific NI, it's not available. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A question on council tax support. So this medium-term financial strategy includes £3.9 million saving on council tax support. We debated it last night. I'm not reopening that debate. So that's made up of 2.8 million from the headline cut to 80% support maximum and 1.1 million from that long tail of other changes. So 3.9 million has been budgeted. That's the additional tax that could be collected. What is the additional tax that will be collected? What assumption has been made for the collection rate on council tax support recipients who've just been dragged into council tax last night?
Okay, so this is not obviously an exact science, and I think as we've seen from, I don't know, if we reflect back to sort of council questions, and when trying to identify activity in relation to, you know, a household that is making a claim, a working age sort of claim, they may be making a claim at one point in the year, but not another point, and vice versa. So very, very difficult to actually sort of pin this one down. What we've done is, as you say, that's the gross income that could be collectible. We recognise that in making those changes, there are a number of things that we need to do. Obviously, we'll be creating a hardship fund. We will need to operate that hardship fund. We will need sort of resources as well in terms of helping to sort of collect. And potentially there will be an element of non-collection, and we've assessed that as a whole, all of that. Now that runs into the several hundreds of thousands, and that is set out in the report. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is our current collection rate at the moment. So we budget for a collection rate of 94.25%. And we monitor this very closely throughout the year on a monthly basis. Our current monitoring shows, if we compare our sort of performance this year against the same time last year, and again doing that on a month-by-month basis, we've been consistently above where we were last year. Our current forecasts are that it should take us above 94.25. So we have a little bit of potential headroom within our collection forecasts. So that, in association, so that's potentially additional income. The report sets out that there is some sort of levy money that the government is making available through the settlement. So those two together will be utilised for sort of funding shortfalls, additional resources.
Okay, thanks. So the shortfall will be covered by the prudence that's been baked into the collection rate assumption, but we don't have an estimate for it. I think that's what you're saying, is that right? For the non-collection rate, for CTS recipients specifically?
Yeah, it's not assigned to that a particular group, but what we will be doing going forward is that we're going to be monitoring the effects of the change quite closely.
Thanks. And a follow-up, if I may, for the Cabinet member. So last night at the full council debate, she graciously agreed to my suggestion of looking into the various stages, I think you said, of the collections process for council tax support recipients who, after that vote last night, will now be dragged into council tax. And she knows that I've proposed that the council should exempt local council tax support recipients, the lowest income households in our borough, from not from collections at all, but from the enforcement agent stage, sending a bailiff around to try and collect that debt from people, the vast, vast majority of whom cannot afford to pay. And for the last 5 years, those bailiff visits haven't happened. And so I was grateful that you agreed to look into the collections process. But on this exemption point, I just want to press you on it, if I may. Croydon, Lewisham, Southwark, Haringey, Camden, Ealing, all do this. 10% of local authorities across the country exempt council tax support recipients from bailiff action. So I think my question is, if I were to send you a written proposal on this, fully worked up with kind of evidence and an impact assessment, would you consider that proposal?
They're all Labour authorities, are they?
Your political knowledge is better than mine.
Oh, that sounds like they are. It does sound like they are. It does sound like they are there, doesn't it?
Croydon's a Conservative
Are you
authority.
publicising Labour policy? Goodness me. Right, anyway, to
And
answer your
and
question.
Croydon, an excellent Conservative Croydon policy as well, just for balance.
Well, you may have a mayor there, Mayor Perry, but I think the vast majority are actually Labour. But anyway, look, we have a very difficult path to tread, and I think I mentioned this last night. On the one hand, you know, we owe it to every single local taxpayer to make sure that we bring in the income that we are required to bring in, because if not, then everyone else is paying for the people who are not paying, isn't it? And again, it is about deciding and discerning who can afford it and don't want to pay, and who can't afford it and can't pay. And you know, I don't want to sit in judgment over anybody, and that's why very often we go through the enforcement route. But what I have said is that we will look at those stages and extend them and look into people's circumstances and be as beneficial as we can be toward them. But we do have that duty to bring that income in. And so we will pursue collection, but in a more gentler, longer way when it comes to people dealing with council tax support. There is a hardship fund. So if somebody genuinely can't afford that 20%, that they would be expected to pay, then by all means they can apply to that hardship fund. And at the moment, we don't know from the GLA how much we will get for that. So hold your powder until we get a figure from the GLA and see where we're at with that. Don't want you to go to all that extra work for nothing. But equally, you must feel free to put anything forward, and it will be looked at always, you know, with great respect. The last thing I would say is I'd really like to thank Corin Hemsley and Damon for all the work that they've done, and Councillor Jackie Smith for all the work that they've done on the council tax support scheme, because it hasn't been easy, and you'll be aware that an awful lot of councils, almost all of them, are looking to seek a contribution from their residents when previously they may have been at 100%. Some are actually offering 50%, and we are still at 80%. So that's still fair.
Thank you for the answer. Could I just have one follow-up very briefly? Thank you, Chair. So, as I said, I'm not trying to reopen the debate. That was the kind of... I think we're winding our way to the same sort of landing zone, possibly for an agreement. All I'd say is you're absolutely right. There is a balance between collections and fairness. But 1 in 10 authorities of all political persuasions, yes, have found that right balance. And why wouldn't we want to be in the top 10% of local authorities for how we treat the lowest incomes? So I will send her a proposal. I'm grateful for the answer. And I have one question for the leader, and then I'm done. So I can do that now, or I can... Thank you, Chair. A question for the Leader of the Council. 2 years ago, we were discussing your administration's first medium-term financial strategy proposals budget. And in that year, there was more government funding than was expected at the time. And we were talking 2 years ago, you'll recall, about proposals that were small, but a bit of a spending spree. And you'll remember the discussions we had about that. And in particularly, there was a contentious issue about your decision to increase the communications team, effectively, communications and engagement team, which cost an extra £220,000 a year. And then since then, we've had an equally contentious decision to introduce the political assistance system, which cost a further £83,000. So that's £300,000 a year. And that's still in the budget. So in light of all the pressures that we've heard about tonight, that we hear about from the Council, could I ask the Leader of the Council, have you reconsidered those decisions that you took in your first year or not?
First of all, thank you, and thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Hartley. First of all, on there's an inaccuracy in what you've said. So the political assistance was not additional funding or a growth item. That's the first thing, because we used existing staffing budgets within the leader's office, which both of the Labour group and the Conservative group have now resourced. So it wasn't a growth item. So that's the first, just correct that point there. On the second point, I think we've seen the worth and the merit of the community engagement team and the work that we're doing. And lastly, one thing I would say is that there has been growth every year in every single budget I've done. So we have seen the benefits that the regeneration team has brought into this council. We have seen the benefits that this community energy has done. We have seen the benefits of the investment, the £1.38 million investment that we placed by opening up mental health hubs, just go to our schools. As you know, myself and Councillor Kyra are going around and doing the school tours with the ambition to visit every school. So every year there has been a level of growth in the budget. We brought back street cleansing. That has had a benefit. The decisions we take is to bring back benefits to our community and make sure we're running an effective council. Thank you.
Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points, if I might. In the budget, there's a line about asset disposals. Are members likely to receive a detailed analysis of asset disposal at some point in time soon? As a consequence of that, there doesn't seem to be any financial implications for the budget in terms of asset disposals at this point of time. So I'm mindful of the issue around the equestrian centre and the legacy that we all worked for in 2012. My understanding is that there's an application likely to be for the Olympics in 2040 in London. So we all ought to be mindful of that as well. The point I'm making really on that point is clearly an asset of community value. So are you happy to look at that in terms of the as an asset of community value and follow that process to enable for organisations that may be interested to participate in its future? And the second point is the concerns I think people have around the proposals for the children, youth play and adventure play centres.
Councillor Fahy, can I stop you there because we're going to move on to those ones? Thank you.
It's coming on assets, and thank you, Councillor Fahy, for your question. On the assets management decision, first of all, nothing precludes the community from coming together to make sure that they can utilise those assets, and that will be subject to an open and transparent tender process. I guess one thing I would say is that strategically, we have to think about how we use our assets and sweat our assets to help deliver our budget gap or deliver bring in more capital to invest in the council. So we are taking a decision or have taken a decision which is about a number of asset disposals, one, but also a significant number of reletting assets. And this is all about sweating our assets to make sure it helps us achieve our aims as a council. And obviously you would note the long-term underfunding of local authorities, but not only the long-term underfunding, time and time again under governments, different governments, we have been told to use our assets to make sure we're running efficient as a council. So that use of an asset is helping support our budget basis, which is why we do it. And therefore, we'll continue to bring forward an asset management strategy, and we hope to bring an asset management strategy soon that will depict our strategy in terms of what we're able to dispose of, what we're able to relet, and also how we think about meanwhile use. I really do think there is an important role for the community to play within our assets, and that's why we use a social value tool to help determine that. And I believe the regeneration department, the growth and place department will be able to speak to that and emphasize some of that maybe when they come up here. And you can think about how the community is involved. Lastly, any community group can put forward a application for a community of, I can never remember the name, the community of assets.
Asset community value.
Of the community value. So any community can put forward that and come forward with an application for the council to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we will now move on to the sort of the detailed proposals for savings and incomes proposals. That's from 10.1. So I'm going to take them in turn just so that we sort of stay on topic. So the first one was the alternative funding for council events, Sparkle in the Park and Together. Does anybody have any questions on that? I had one. As well as looking at advertising and sponsorship, is there going to be any consideration for either voluntary contributions or perhaps charging people, perhaps maybe non-Greenwich residents for attending those events? So for example, if Sparkle's held in Avery Hill Park, I know we're right on the border of Bexley there and a lot of Bexley residents come. Is there scope for looking at both voluntary contributions and potentially charging certain people for those events as well as sponsorship and advertising?
I might defer to Mersad on this one, just because I think there was some existing work that happened on that.
That's absolutely fine. Would you like to come to the table?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. The answer is yes, we did 2 years ago when we actually, because we had those festivals every year. So at that stage, we were considering basically what would it look like if we were to charge basically people that come, and we know that a lot of people do come to some of those events, certainly Sparkle in the Park, from outside Greenwich. What we worked out is that actually introducing mechanisms would probably cost and break even and not generate any additional funds. So it would just be an administration challenge for all of us.
Thank you. Moving on then, oh sorry, Councillor Fletcher, you said you had a question on this one as well.
Yeah, it wasn't really a question, it was just really an observation, is that obviously, as we've been hearing, all local authorities are in the same position, and there haven't been fireworks on Blackheath Common for years because of the cost of it. But I was just wondering whether our officers have looked at perhaps merging Sparkle in the Park for Blackheath Common with Lewisham or Bexley or other councils, merging the cost. So you do a massive one rather than individual.
I mean, it's a suggestion, and it makes me think about the point about shared services, which has been discussed at this panel, indeed, before. What I would say is that I'm not convinced we've explored that in that way. Okay. Well, I'll let Mercer come on the technical accuracy of what I just said. But what I would say is different councils in different financial positions. And I think if you were to go around and look at neighbouring boroughs, and I won't name any, financial positions, you'll see the difficulty that they are in. And there are often call to actions for joint initiatives that people want. A good example of that is the fireworks. And what I can say is that in speaking to my colleagues, that is not their focus because of their financial position. So I do hear the call to action, but what I would say, I think there is a real challenge financially in local government, but I think your challenge is different. What you're saying is collectively, can we do something collectively? And I will throw that challenge back to our officers to see what can be done.
I think it is a great suggestion, and as the leader said, with fireworks, we had an agreement with another neighboring local authority, but unfortunately different dynamics in different local authorities, different priorities, self-interest do not basically help to have a cohesive approach to a number of things geographically.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next. Oh, did you have one on this? Okay. We'll move on to the next one, Mersad. I think you might as well stay seated because a lot of these proposals fall in your area. And we also have the Cabinet Member for Equality, Culture and Communities here as well, if we have any political questions to address them to. The next one is the adapting library opening times to match demand. If I could just kick us off here to, if we could understand a little bit of how you are going to measure demand in that case. Thank you.
Sorry, would you mind just repeating the question? I was just opening the papers.
No, don't worry. So adapting library opening times to match demand, I was wondering, how are you measuring demand in that case? Is it footfall? Is it library books? Is it other services? Thank you.
So, as you quite rightly said, there are a number of metrics we could use basically to measure that. Initially, we were using the number of books hired, but we have also the measurements of the footfall, basically, that people attend to the libraries. And then we know what the costs are, and we can basically work out the unit cost per visit potentially.
And when you're looking at unit cost per visit, have there been any discussions or challenges to GLL, particularly in the libraries where there hasn't been as much footfall, to increase that footfall? So have there been maybe targets or challenges to get them to sort of put on different events or groups that might increase footfall in those areas?
An SLA with GLL basically has the KPIs that we monitor, and that is a continuous challenge, whether it is the leisure centres or the libraries. The real fact is basically that some smaller libraries may have greater challenges than the bigger ones, but there is an indicator basically that we measure all the time when we are in discussion with GLL.
Thank you. Councillor Hartley?
Thank you very much. Yeah, a couple of questions on the libraries item. Thank you, Chair. The first is, I really welcome that there's a clear black and white statement that says there's no proposals to close any of the current libraries. And if the trade-off to that is changes to opening hours and better use of new technology, then I think that's the right balance. Can I ask when the decision will be made about opening hours? Because, of course, that does affect a lot of people in the community who use the libraries. And I'll give the second question now as well, which is, further to your point, really, Chair, could we really try and encourage schools to use their local smaller libraries? Because at the moment, schools like Montbell and Greenacres in my ward are encouraged to use the Eltham Centre. When Cold Harbour Library is right there, it's a lesser used library, but it's a resource that could be used and cut down on travel in the borough in furtherance of the council's objectives. So see what I did there? So those two questions. Thank you.
I mean, on the point about schools, I think yes, in terms of encouraging them, but obviously it's down to a decision for schools to make. And when we're going around, we can hopefully continue to encourage. I mean, we do encourage schools to engage with libraries, but many of them themselves also have their own libraries within their own schools and that environment. And I'm sure they will understand the nature of the trip that they make to a library and what resources they need to be able to do that. So, but I think I take the point on that. Was there an additional question there that I had missed?
A clear timetable for when opening hour changes will be announced and publicised.
I'll bring in Mercer on that one.
So the first phase is basically a decision that this is adopted by the budget. Then we have a statutory process. We are not the first one. Local authority is doing something like this or going extreme to close the libraries. We have to do basically the consultation as per the Department of Communities, Media and Sports. Once that consultation is done basically and we get relevant feedback plus the information that we discussed early on, then basically proposal will be firmed up and put in front of the relevant elected members to make a decision.
Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose the nature of this, and it's relevant to the play centres item as well, is these documents are in the public domain. A lot of concern about both of these items, and we'll come on to play centres. But so on libraries, can we give the public a sense of when a decision will be made? Because you know, later this year, next year, it'd be helpful just to be able to help residents understand the process.
An indicator, basically, in terms of when the decisions will be made is linked to the medium-term financial planning forecasting. So we are hoping, basically, in the Q1 of the next financial year that we may have some decision or Q2 the latest in terms of delivering the savings also.
Okay, so between now and autumn, in sort of, yeah, plain speak.
Obviously, a lot of these proposals are subject to us sitting down in a room and really trying to think about how we achieve them. And negotiations as well, which I believe the library decision was in the first proposal, and this is an expansion of that one as a result of those conversations that we had with GLL. So some of this will take time, and that's the difficulty of being. We wouldn't want to sit here and mislead the panel in giving a timeline that wasn't achievable, because obviously it's subject to consultation as well as additional conversations, and the same can be said for the other proposal that we'll go on to discuss later.
Thank you. Just adding to this particular point on library opening times. Now, I can say that there's not a single elected member of any party who came here into politics thinking that they would reduce library opening hours. It's something I think we all feel quite strongly about, and we're very cognizant of the financial situation we're in. When we look at public services, if you look at National Rail or bus services, one of the great things about having that in public ownership and under public control is that the better used routes can subsidise the ones that are used less well. And I think the same analogy can be used for libraries. So you do have the libraries with higher footfall, and that's almost cross-subsidising to an extent the libraries that don't have it. And what I'd like Cabinet to consider when looking at this and working this proposal through over the next year is not just looking at demand, but also looking at need and the needs of the communities as well. So not just how the footfall and the numbers of books borrowed, but the need in the community and what resources there are or aren't within that community. And I'd like to put that forward, I think, as a comment to Cabinet when considering this going forwards. Yeah.
The leaders just asked me to basically, so we got different piece of the work that is done through the VCS Community Resource Strategy together with DRES Place and Growth, new title for our DRES department. So we come up with a strategy basically that looked at all the assets that we have across the borough, and really much we are using that data now to shape our place shaping vision, which includes basically the needs and where we spend the money and so on and so forth. So it's very much, we've got the documents and information to create basically a holistic approach to the borough as it is developing in the next number of years.
Thank you. So when looking at this, then you would be looking at not just demand and needs, so it's a sensible comment for us to put forward, and that works well with your holistic view. Thank you. Councillor Richards-Cotell.
Thank you. Just finally, do you plan to review the demand opening times after a set period, so like after a year or so, or continuously? And if demand increases in some of those libraries, would you plan to maybe expand it in the future or review it in the future?
So I think the point I want to make is in the context of what has been discussed today is, i.e. medium-term financial strategy, library services are statutory services in terms that you have to have the provision, not how many libraries you have and how often they are open and which days and how many hours. And we are one of the local authorities has got quite a number of libraries more than others. As colleagues said earlier and elected members, we are facing basically challenges for the next number of years, so I'm sure we'll be asked basically as a department to come up with the proposals. So I'm sure that we'll be reviewing everything all the time, whether and what the political aspirations are in terms of opening things or closing or reviewing. So I think it's a moving picture.
And just to add, you know, we sit down constantly and review library hours for our one-to-ones, and through that we get a picture of what the demand looks like.
Thank you. If there are no further questions on this one, we will move on to the next item, which is on 10.5, which is investing in parks and transforming children's youth play, part 1, adventure centres. We do have one public speaker who's asked to speak, Michael Suku. The microphone just here, if next to Councillor Fletcher, if you would like to use this one, since the table is now full.
Hi there. I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure if it's... Are we on? Yeah? Okay, thank you. My colleagues got in touch with me when the document became public, and some of the information in there sort of paints us in a bad light in terms of... and also one of the main things I wanted to speak about was the how the statistics... I'm a bit nervous, sorry. All right, sorry. Normally we produce, submit stats every month, and they sort of go forward for the, you know, collated at the end of the year and gives us an idea how many children attend the site.
Sorry, just for clarity for the committee, you work at one of the centres?
Yeah, and also a Unite Shop steward as well, yeah. Okay. So for argument's sake, you know, if a kid comes in 5 times during the week, he's counted 5 times. You know, separate times. Just before Christmas, I think we had a phone call from GLL saying, could you give us the... I'm just trying to get the right words. It's not the KPI, it was the unique service users. And how that works is, so we said, how does that work? Because normally we provide the stats weekly and on a monthly basis. They said, basically, if a child comes in 5 times, we can only count him once. So we all feel that it's a bit of a disservice in terms of the numbers who attend our centres. And also, there's issues around... We provide sports already. Over the last couple of years, we've had teams from sports development coming in and sort of duplicating what we do. You know, some will see it as an addition. I mean, some of us saw it as a bit of a threat. And we're in a position now where, again, we're being asked to take on sports guys from sports development team in order to sort of deliver the bits and pieces that we're doing already. So it's sort of undermining what we do, you know, and possibly, you know, a bit of a threat to our sort of our work, sort of thing. So we sort of had concerns about that. And there's another issue which happened during the summer up at one of our play centres at Cold Harbour, where I think a group from sports development turned up with in order to do consultation in the football cage. And reading the document, it seems as though from the strength of that consultation, where they're talking to some of our young people and passers-by, that some of the things that were discussed there, it seems like it's in the document already, you know, in terms of transforming the service. The service has been around for like 50 plus years. It's still thriving now. You know, it depends what, you know, how you look at it, but it's still thriving now. One of the things which worries me about the document is, like I said, it paints us in a bad light. You know, so I mean, in terms of transforming the service, we are where we are because of previous transformations. You know, we as staff, we've never really had a say in the matter. So, and this time around, we'd like the council to, you know, consult with staff, consult with the union, and consult with the young people, because no one's spoken to the young people at any of the centres.
Thank you very much. Is that everything you wanted to say?
I mean, it's just generally the way Greenwich have gone about it. You know, the young people's document, when I was looking at it today before I came here, there's 444 people spoken to, young people spoken to, 63 parents. Everything was directed towards the Charlton Care Partnership and the youth hubs, and not one person came in and spoke to any of our children or staff from the adventure playgrounds. And like I said, we've been established here for the last over 50 years, you know. So it's a bit of a disservice. Like I said, some of the information in that document around savings as well, again, I question that very strongly, you know. It's been spoken of £820,000 or so being invested, and then over subsequent years, they're taking back, or they're making savings of 600,000. They're talking about providing more. It's an old service, not an old service. Basically, it's old hat. We're still very popular. At the end of every year, when you look at our stats, on a bad year, we might get 60,000 children over 5 centres. On a good year, it's a lot better than that. You know, things fluctuate. You know. So, like I said, it paints us in a very bad light because it seems as though the agenda's been, you know, it's been decided already what's going on, what's happening. But whatever happens in the future, we want to be consulted. We want to be centre of it. I want our young people to be centre of it. And how it's run in the future, at the moment, I'm a centre manager at one of the centres. You know, I want to be involved. I want to be in the management structure to ensure that things are done properly and the kids are sort of looked after properly, because they're often overlooked within, you know, they're often overlooked in the adventure playground. We're poorly resourced, and things like trips. We used to take the trips away, kids away on trips on a regular basis under Greenwich. Since we've been with GLL, they curtailed all that. You know, some of the issues we're having in the borough, we could alleviate by offering more diversionary activities. And our hands have been tied, basically. Okay, cheers, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for waiting so long in this meeting before speaking. Does anyone want to address the comments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe his name, the colleague's
Michael Tuku.
Michael. First of all, I just want to recognise the strength of feeling that Michael has in regards to this proposal, because obviously he doesn't work within adventure playgrounds for the fun of it, but potentially for his passion for the job in working with children and young people in the borough. I think there was a lot in that speech. One that speaks to the responsible person. So there's GLL and there's the council. We have to begin to differentiate that in terms of the context of they. So in terms of the point about counting of children, I think that's a very serious claim that needs to be checked, and as such, that needs to be checked by GLL, which would be, I presume, the responsible organisation to do that. I can presume that GLL would have brought that intel and data. So I think we need to get some of that in writing, and would welcome Michael to formally, which I know he has written to me, but not on those specific points that he raises today. So I would encourage him to formally write to me so that we can explore that and have conversations with the partner, because no one wants to falsify numbers that inform a budgetary position. So I'll just ask him that he details that down and clarifies some of the points that he made, because I found at some points just confusing in terms of who had the responsibility. So I'd encourage him to do that. I think that's all that I want to say.
Do you want to also address the consultation point and what consultation is going to happen?
With staff, and again, that's a good point that I should add. Because GLL will have to consult with their staff and set out their consultation process with staff, because he potentially is directly employed by GLL, which I presume, which is separate from the council in that regard. And obviously, they will have to go for formal human resources consultation.
I think it wasn't just about, the possibility of jobs. I think it's more about when we're talking about consultation in this paper, I think when you're looking at the future, you're going to consult with young people.
Yeah.
I think the staff will also be consulted on provision. It's more from that public consultation point of view to make sure that everyone is properly consulted. I don't think it was just about jobs. I might be
Thank
putting
you,
words in
because
your mouth.
that wasn't what came across to me. But if it is about that, yep, there will be an open and transparent consultation in that regard. One thing I will say is that when I first became leader of this administration, the first thing I told Councillor Kyra, who was serving in the brief of the Cabinet Member for Equality, Culture and Communities, that I wanted to invest in adventure playgrounds because I see them as a huge resource. The decision before us today is about reimagining a service, and that's very much what I look at it as being. And that's why we want to take this proposal and work with our Children's Services Department, as well as our Communities Directorate, and think about how we open it up. The adventure playgrounds aren't open all year round. We want to make sure that they are a bit more independent and invest some money in them to be able to deliver that. So although this is about transformation, it is about reimagining, I think that we are trying to do a really good job on them, and the testimony will be the outputs of the work that we do. Thank you.
I think there might have been a point of clarification from Michael behind you on the opening times of the adventure playgrounds. Are they actually open all year round?
Yes, they're open all year round. Due to my nerves, some information I get across to the group, so can I just...
Sorry, we normally just have public speakers for 2 minutes, but the leader has said that you can put all of this in writing. This isn't a final decision. There's going to be consultation on this item. It's open all year round. Thank you.
I'll bring a Mercer to clarify the point.
Yeah, so this could be one of the points, basically, in terms of the GLL. We are led to believe that they open 261 days, 25 hours a week. But the point that we are making is basically, through reimagining, we want to open those basically to be much longer so they can be utilized by children out there.
Thank you. Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate the comments made by Michael, which were very interesting. It does seem to me that there's a wider issue and a wider debate about how we provide for young people anywhere, across the board. And the serious issues we've had over the last few years, really, provides us with an opportunity to look how we can improve services. But that has to be across the borough in a very positive way. So I think the proposal about refocusing is an important one, we should all encourage. But I do think if there is attempts to reduce the service in any aspect, then we ought to know how that denies young people the opportunity to participate in activities that promote their lives rather than getting involved in crime and antisocial behavior activities and all of that. So in that regard, I'm slightly worried about the issues around, we're here this evening consulting about the budget. A report's going to Council in February on the budget, and yet consultation on this matter has not as yet taken place. So,
So it can't, because it's not agreed as a policy position. It's still a draft budget. We've not taken the formal decision on this as a proposal, as it's still a draft budget. Once the proposal is agreed by full council.
So I'm just suggesting that there's a wider debate to be had about what additional services need to happen in regard to the wider issues. And I know, for instance, there's nothing in this report of where the centres are. I know a couple, because I've been there, not playing, I might say. For instance, in Greenwich, there's an issue about Meridian and all of that. But the final point I wanted to make, my understanding about the GLL contracts with Greenwich, I find interesting, because I think we don't have a holistic contract providing all our services. As I understand it, it may have changed, that we have different contracts for different services. So why don't we have a borough-wide agreement with GLL about the services they provide for us, whether it's libraries, whether it's leisure centres, or whether it's adventure playgrounds, and then debate that as to how we can all work to achieve the maximum for the benefit of young people. And of course, the other issue is, as I understand it, and somebody might say commercial confidentiality, which I'm very used to these days, is a regular pattern of life for me, really, is about how GLL is a social enterprise organization who's got some very good credentials about helping young people can get involved in all of this. But I think the report is a positive one, but I think there's more work to do on it. Thanks.
First of all, I think Councillor Farhan, and thank you for your intervention and comments, makes an important point about the wider landscape of services for children and young people. And this is just one part of that. So there is ongoing work at the moment looking at the wider landscape of what that intervention looks like for different children and young people who have different challenges and in different groups. Adventure playgrounds won't work for everybody. Some of the services we do under Young Greenwich might not work for everybody. And therefore, there is a holistic work being done at the moment by Councillor Kyra and teams on looking at that. And I think the aim is, as part of that, we will also look at this as well. So this is a joint effort between the various departments to think about the adventure playgrounds and also get children and young people involved. So I think in that regard, it meets the point that you make about that holistic view and that view about how we are approaching it. I'll bring Mercer in on the point about GLL and the specifics about contracts.
Thank you very much, Leader and Councillor Five. I can just say basically the project team has got community safety officers, children's services and community environment directorates, so it is a holistic approach. In terms of the GLL, as you are aware, we have had historically those discussions, and last year the Council decided to bring all the contracts that it has commissioned GLL for to review basically and optimize its delivery. But the reason why GLL has a number of contracts with the council is like any other supplier. When we go out there, basically the contractors bid, and over the time, they basically have won a number of contracts with different time spans. However, we recognize that we may have economical advantage because of the economies of scale, and then we use that to negotiate. So last year or in this year's financial savings, we are working very much in partnership with them to deliver those savings, and we are on the same journey basically for hopefully next year.
Just on that point, but that also presents an opportunity for us to look wider about how we bring things together as well, and that is ongoing work that we are equally doing.
Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. And likewise, very grateful to Michael for sharing his insights with us and taking the trouble to come. We've heard several times the phrase adventure playground in what we've heard tonight, and I think that really underplays the role that adventure play centres are having. These aren't playgrounds, they're adventure play centres. And Michael mentioned Cold Harbour. Cold Harbour Adventure Play Centre in my ward plays an absolutely critical role on the Cold Harbour estate. It's part of the fabric of the estate, and everybody who works there does such an incredible job of inspiring young people. And I think there was a really important point that we heard about the fact that no one has yet spoken to the young people who use the centre. And I wanted to suggest a recommendation from the panel for later, Chair, that we recommend that young people aren't just consulted, they're involved in the design of the transformed service. So just want to park that recommendation. Because they play such an important role, it's really important, I think, we get some clarity out there. And I've mentioned this with the Cabinet member, and we've had exchanges about this. Earlier, Councillor Hyland said this was, the objective was transform rather than cut. And we've also heard the phrase reimagining the service. And the paperwork for the budget proposal shows a investment, mostly a capital investment of £800,000, and then a revenue saving of £600,000. So for people out there who are very concerned about this review, it's quite a mixed and difficult picture. You know, there's talk of a lot of investment in centres, but there's also a revenue saving. And that's transformation, and that comes with transformation. But one thing that's caused a lot of concern is on the libraries item, there is a black and white statement that no library will close. And there isn't an equivalent statement in the play centre item. So I wonder if I could just ask my first question, could we get some clarity? Will any Adventure Play Centre site currently in situ close?
Thank you very much. And just on that point, I think what we're trying to do with the adventure playgrounds, again, is reimagine. So it could potentially be that some of the assets on them might change use or be used for something different. It might be that they are moved elsewhere or reimagined in a different location. So that's all subject to a review. So I can't give you that guaranteed assurance. There is a level of investment there that speaks to an initial thought process of it. But that is what we need to sit down and really work out. There are parts of the borough that don't have full access to services. And therefore, that reimagining process that I talked about really has to take that holistic view all into consideration.
Okay, then, thank you. So I think then the natural follow-up is, a plea, really, that we need to get clarity out there on the specific impacts on the current sites, out of a fairness to the users of those sites and staff, as soon as possible. Because the nature of this is the budget proposals are published, they're in the public domain, and there's a lot of concern. And I think the sooner the council can close down any concern that might be needless, in many cases, the better. Thank you for the answer. The second question is about the point we've heard about measurement. And from what Michael shared with us, I didn't hear that as an accusation about figures in perhaps the way that it could have been interpreted. I heard it as a very legitimate challenge about how the review will take into account and measure the impact of the services. So, for example, we heard how will service users be counted? And this is a common problem in measuring impact of any service. Do you count the number of interactions that a young person has with the play centre, or do you count unique people that use the service? So I would just like to suggest another recommendation on this, if I may, Chair, which is that we recommend to Cabinet that we get assurances that the review will take in a full measurement of the total impact, the total social value that is being provided by the play centres in whatever way that is measured. And I'm not getting into specifics, but the full impact on young people and their life chances, and not just a numbers game, and certainly not just a unique young people numbers game, because I think, again, that will drastically underestimate the incredible work that our adventure play centres do. So I just want to suggest that second recommendation.
I was just going to say, the lawyer in me outside of this room would object to the full social value, because that's very, very difficult to define. But I think we can probably work together on a recommendation that looks at proper engagement with young people, not just consultation of young people, and to Councillor Fahy's point as well, sort of looking holistically at what young people in our borough need and how reimagining this service can best support them. And I think we can come up with the wording for that would not be full social value. Councillor Okereke.
It might be worth correcting the record just for there's clarity between the 2 points, because what I heard was that we were told to count a certain amount of numbers as an increased number. So I just need clarity on that, and that's why I've asked for that. My understanding was that. So I think it's just, if we get Michael to clarify formally, because if someone is telling me that they have been told to count a smaller number as a certain number as an increased number, I take that as a serious thing.
And I think that's really important, because we want to make sure that whatever decision is made as we're having these discussions over the next year, that the right numbers are being counted. And I think that's really important to everybody. And again, really thank you so much, Michael, for coming in and sharing. Okay, so moving on, I think, from Adventure Play Centres, the next was Marion Wilson Deer Park, which I don't think we need to cover today. Go on then.
Thank you for your patience, Chair. It's just a really important point. Following the withdrawal of this proposal, removal of the Council's planned closure of Marion Wilson Animal Park, I just think it's really important that the Council gives certainty to the community outside of the budget setting process. It's a constructive suggestion. Could the leader consider sort of bringing to bear the Council's sort of process to make sure that we give some certainty to the community on the longer term, as we heard earlier, beyond the current financial year, future of the animal park? Could we do that well in advance of next year's budget so it doesn't get swept up in the whole of the budget proposals? I think the Council would benefit from that, and I know the community would, because it's such a much-loved asset, as we've just learned in the last week, you know, from the amazing response from the community.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. You know, I remember last year you asked myself and Councillor Highland to consider all proposals that were taken off the table. And we listened to you, and we did exactly that, and the animal park was one of them. It wasn't one that we brought forward, and I'm sure that's still your position. However, I think my statement made to the Chamber yesterday, and the subsequent statement released on our Council's social media pages, sets the record and decides and sets out what that future looks like. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So then moving on to the next proposal, which is sustainable streets. Did anybody have any question on sustainable streets? No. Market to full cost recovery. Any questions on that? No. Any other questions on any part of the budget or the fees and charges? No? Great, so then it's just to clarify the comments that we want to give to Cabinet. So I took down 3, but I might have missed some, so committee, please do keep me right. So I think the first one that we were considering was to explore ways to defray costs of innovation by offering other local authorities the opportunity to source them from us. Does that sound about right, Councillor Hartley? Feel free to suggest your own wording. It was your comment.
Oh, yeah, you're testing my memory in a long meeting now. Yes, I suppose the recommendation, yes, was to explore opportunities to defray the Council's investment in innovation where the benefits of that innovation can be shared with other local authorities to meet shared challenges. How's that, Chair?
I think that sounds good. Committee happy with that recommendation? Great. We'll maybe just get you to write that down before you leave. We have a recording, but the second one was about the library. I'm trying to get to the right page. Adapting library opening times to match demand. So I'd like to make the comment to Cabinet to not only consider the current demand for library services, but also the needs of the communities that those libraries serve. Everyone happy with that one? Great. The third one I have was on when looking at reimagining and transforming children's youth play to not just consult, but to engage with young people, parents, and other stakeholders, including employees, and for the review to take, and I've forgotten the wording, so we did not want to use full social value, but to take into account a holistic view of the children's needs. The f- So it's not specifically that service, so it's about the holistic services that we're offering young people in the area. So it's not just because the proposal isn't just adventure play centres, it's broader than that. So I think it's important that the holistic view is taken. I think everyone agrees with the sentiment, so we can work on the wording. Brilliant. So I think that takes us. Oh yes, had I forgotten a couple of the recommendations?
After you.
Well, just following on from what I said earlier about looking ahead, I thought maybe we could ask the Cabinet, ask for a sort of push for a 3-year settlement, which I know is something that we all need and are asking for, and that when we do get these potential figures, that we get them early, so something just around that. More lobbying from us.
To give Damon a Christmas. I think I remember this recommendation, I think, from the last two, definitely at least one of the last overview and scrutiny committees. So I think, yes, I think we all agree that 3-year settlements would be beneficial. And Councillor Fahy for a 5th recommendation.
Chair, well, I've got every confidence in Cabinet colleagues. I'd like to include that we seek the acceleration of the review of consultancy and agency costs.
I mean, it's a recommendation from the last committee by way of the Financial Management Board. So I think it is ongoing, but you can add it again for fun.
Re-emphasise the need for it. I think everyone's happy with that. And Councillor Hartley?
I'm so sorry, I may have missed your wording. Did we also capture the recommendation about ensuring that young people are involved in the design? We did. Apologies, thank you. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That concludes item 6. Thank you all very much for your time. Item 7 on the agenda is the forward plan. So are the committee happy to note the upcoming executive decisions? Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.